Hi, welcome again to Season 2 of Pages Promotions Indie Reads TV. I am super excited. We've got such a great lineup of really cool authors this season to bring to you. I'm so excited I can barely stand it. Okay, enough of my enthusiasm. We are going to talk today with Sherry A. Burton, who's an amazing author. I'm so excited to have you in my studio. I can't even, as we talked when we came in, I love you and I hate you. And we'll get into that. But so I welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you could be here. We're going to talk about your book, which is this amazing, here it is, Discovery, the Orphan Train Saga. I got to say, I am just so taken with this story, the characters and the places, and the part of it is set in Michigan.
Yes.
This book, a good deal of it is set in Michigan. So I'm really super stoked about that because it's a pretty rare thing to find indie authors who write about Michigan. So I'm really pleased to introduce your work to my viewers because it's Michigan, it's indie, and it's a captivating story. So you're a triple threat. Uh-oh. So tell me a little bit about, we're going to flip back to this so I can show it to everybody. This is the Orphan Train Saga. Give us a little bit of the history of what an orphan train was.
Okay. I do talk with my hands.
It's okay, you're allowed. Go ahead.
In the mid-1850s, there was over 30,000 children that lived on the streets of New York City. And we're talking children as young as 4 and 5 that had to lie, cheat, steal, just do whatever it took just to survive.
Right.
So basically, they had to figure out a way to help these children. So between 1854 and 1929, New York shipped over 250,000 children, 250,000 children that most people have never heard of out west to find new homes.
That's craziness.
So many people have not heard of it that I'm just kind of making it my mission to entertain or to introduce people to these children, and I just don't want them to be forgotten.
No, I agree. Did you come by this story through personal connections, or was this just a slice of history that you were interested in? Did you know somebody who rode the trains?
I actually didn't. I was standing out. My friend, anyway, she was standing out and she was talking to her neighbor, and they said something about the orphan trains. And I'm like, I've never heard of the orphan trains, and it just really intrigued me. And so I started researching, and that was back in 2000, and that's before we had a computer, so it wasn't very easy to research.
Right.
But it was back when I was writing my very first novel, and I just thought, someday I'm going to write a story about an orphan train rider. Well, I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was really new into writing, so it kind of got put on hold, and I wrote other things. And then one day we were at a train museum in Wisconsin, and the voices started talking, saying, now's the time.
It's tough to ignore those voices,
Sure
especially when they're as loud as these characters.
Yes.
These characters are loud.
They are.
They're not loud. They're
intense.
They're intense, but beyond intense, they're unrelenting. These are children you have to pay attention to.
Yes.
I was struck by how unique and individualized each one of these children were. Each one of them has a little, or several in some cases, idiosyncrasies that make them so special and unique. How did you find that writing them? Was that a big challenge for you to write them, or did you just basically take dictation?
No, seriously, I always say I'm just a vessel, that my voices are just kind of pouring through me, and they tell me what to write. And most of the time, I have no clue. I don't chart. I don't know what's going to happen until I actually put it on paper.
So this is usually a question that always comes up is, pantser versus plotter. You're a pantser.
Absolutely. 18 novels. I mean, that's scary being a pantser.
Okay, now.
Yes.
Let's have this conversation. I was planning on being more reserved about this, but I just can't be. 18 novels.
18.
Is that because there are 18 children that have stories to be told? you just said you're a pantser, so you've got to be hybrid in some way because you know there's going to be 18
I
ghosts.
know there's going to be.
Is that because there are 18 children?
That's because that's what the voices told me. I mean, I can't explain it any more than that, but the voices told me there's going to be 18. I introduced 17 of the 18 in book 1.
Wait a minute, there were 7?
Yes, there's 17 in book 1.
Okay, I think I remember 5. But that's because they were the most unrelenting with their stories.
Correct. You'll just you'll meet them like at the asylum.
Okay.
And then the other ones kind of come into play after.
Okay. So we have to clarify here a little bit for people who don't understand the history. Asylum isn't the nut house.
Correct.
An asylum is a place where they used to put undesirables, unwanted, or misfits, or didn't know what to do with them.
Correct.
And in those days, it wasn't an orphanage, it was an asylum.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. A little creepy factor in here, just a sliver of it, because there's a piece of it that made me hearken to the Holocaust. Because in the beginning, they take off the main character's old clothes, they shave her head, essentially. They cut her hair super short.
Right.
And I kind of stopped and I went, they dunk her in a bath and and she goes through this. She's such a brave child. And I thought, okay, it's very odd that I'm reading this book at the same time that we're celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Holocaust. I thought that was just odd timing for me.
Right.
But in your research, did you find that those things were they that parallel? Or was that embellishment on your part?
That was embellishment. That was just what the voices told me to write.
Okay. So you're just completely abdicating here.
I seriously, I mean, yes, I've not read. I mean, I'm sorry to say I haven't read a lot on the Holocaust, so I don't know that part.
Sure.
But this is just what the voices told me that needed to happen. You know, she's a child. She's coming in. New York City was just infested with bugs and, stuff. So I figured that if they come in. It
makes perfect sense. I mean, that's why it was done during the Holocaust. It makes perfect sense.
Right.
But I was just struck by the parallels. And I kind of went, wow, could we have been that cold and disconnected to our children during that time? Was it really that horrible a time in history? That's where my head went. And then she found friends and found love, and I was super happy, and, So tell me a little bit about the locations that you chose for the story. You chose New York, and then you chose Detroit. And then you chose Sandusky, Michigan.
Yes.
Those are the 3 primary,
exactly.
Locations. Were there historical purposes behind that, or was that, again, part of the voices telling you the story?
Well, the New York, again, most of the orphan trains, they came out of New York. The children came from the East Coast, Boston, New York, that area.
Okay.
So all the orphan trains, and they wasn't actually called orphan trains back then. It was the Placing Out program.
Okay.
They wasn't actually called the orphan trains until about the mid-'70s when there was a PBS show on the orphan trains, and that was the title of it. So it kind of people took
So that's
that
how they got the moniker then.
Exactly. So, but everything came out of New York. And the very first orphan train arrived in 1854 in October in Dowagiac, Michigan. So that was the very first one. So I live in Michigan, so I wanted to bring books here. But also, Michigan has a strong history. It was kind of their test pilot.
Sure.
And so it worked. The children got placed, and they didn't have to be adopted.
Yeah, I noticed that in the author's epilogue that you put in here.
Right.
That it wasn't a requirement that they adopt the children. In some cases, all they had to do was promise to keep them fed and give them a roof.
Correct.
So that kind of struck me as shocking, and how dare we? Don't we know better?
Well, but, I mean, a lot of people are not happy with the orphan train program and thought it was a bad thing. But you got to understand, these kids were dying in the streets.
Well, that's true, yeah.
And there were so many of them. And, if you look at the history of New York and what was going on back then, they needed to do something. It was before child labor laws.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of these children that could work, they were working in factories alongside men, not the women, because the women weren't allowed to work inside factories. There was a few garment places, but for the most part, women were not allowed to work.
Right.
So, the children would work alongside men. And so it was before the child labor laws. It was before the social services that would help keep families together.
Right.
There was no
so
programs
really
like this.
putting them on the trains was the lesser of evils.
I believe so, yes.
Because it
And
at
we
least
do know that
kept them from starving to death.
Exactly. And we
Yeah.
do know, history does tell us that 80% of the children had better lives than had they have stayed in New York.
Okay, so let's backtrack just a second. We're talking a lot about history. When you got this idea from your neighbor, standing there having a conversation, did you then start writing, or did you go do a bunch of research and then come back and start writing?
That was in 2000. I didn't touch it until we went to the train museum and the voices. I mean, we were at the train.
So how long ago after that was it?
That was 17 years.
In between?
In between the time that I had first heard about them
So
until I
these
started
characters
writing.
have been fermenting in your head and whispering little
No.
things at you over 17 years?
These characters are all brand new. But I think it's because I didn't start writing when the voices first told me about them. And when I first heard about them and first thought, hey, I'm going to write a book. So because I waited so long, that's why it's so many children. You had to wait. So, hey, now you're going to write about all these kids, one per year that you
can't
waited.
leave them out. Yeah, one per year. Yes, exactly. Okay. So music plays a very interesting key component in this book.
Correct.
Your main character has a passion and an ability that is unsurpassed by many. Why did you choose to bring that in? Again, was that a voice thing, or was that it was just part of her character
just
that
part
told
of
you
her
she plays
character.
piano?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I have never played a piano, so I don't know. I had to research different things there. But yes, it was just that was part of it. And you'll hear a little more about the reasoning in that when you read Tobias's book, which you now have to read because you read book
Well,
one.
that where is it? There it is. Book 2 is Tobias's book,
Correct.
whose nickname is Mouse, which is
Correct.
why we have one.
Yes.
And he's I gotta tell you, he's a really interesting character to me. Out of all of the characters that came through in this book, Tobias was the one that spoke loudest
Yes.
to me. And this is why I asked for your permission to use him in my upcoming book, was because as you know, I'm writing a workshop workbook
Right.
manual. And I loved how Tobias was such a great romance character and bucked all convention of what a romance character is supposed to be. He didn't wine and dine, and he didn't swoon, and he didn't do all those walking off into the sunset pecs showing thing.
Right.
He's a down-to-earth, I'm going to do what I got to do for those I love kind of character. And you introduce the Purple Gang in here as
Correct.
well.
Correct.
And I'm not going to give away too much of it, but did you do research on the Purple Gang?
Yes, I did.
What did you find that was most striking to you about that part of the research?
Honestly, that the Purple Gang was so bad and so notorious that even Al Capone was frightened of them.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just an evil, but fascinating. Just fascinating.
Yeah. As part of the Jewish community, I know quite a bit about the Purple Gang, and I used to write for a newspaper that I did a lot of connectivity stuff with the Purple Gang, and
Right.
they're a scary bunch of people. But simultaneously, what I love about what you did in this book is that you humanized them. They were not just a mob, mafia, Godfather-esque kind of group of people. You humanized them. You made them real.
And you'll see more of that in Tobias's story. One of the things, I talk about the voices and the guides, and it's kind of guiding me along. My husband and I were coming back. I was doing a lecture in Manistee, and we were coming back, and we just kept seeing the sign, Cops and Donuts. And I'm like, oh, well, we at least got to check it out. Well, we're driving into Claire, which was big for the Purple Gang.
Right.
And I didn't know this. I had no clue.
Okay.
So we're driving into Claire, and there's this house sitting there. And we passed this house, and something about this house just called to me. I'm like, that is a cool house. Well, we went in there, we took a picture, and we were leaving. I text my daughter. I said, hey, we got a picture of the cops and donuts. She goes, did you go in? I said, no. She goes, we have to have donuts. So we turned around and went back. So we've now passed this house 3 times. And each time, I'm just like, there's something about that house. And I didn't know what it was. Well, we went into the donut shop, and there's all this stuff. My husband, he went to the restroom, and he goes, all on the wall. There's Purple Gang stuff. And I'm like, you're kidding. Well, then they have books, and they have all kinds of stuff on the Purple Gang there. And so I started talking to the lady behind the counter, and she says, there is a house down the street that is connected to the Purple Gang, that they...
and that was the house you were taking pictures
yes,
of? Yeah.
Yes. I have pictures on my phone. I'm like, I went in there, and my husband's like, please don't get arrested. I'm like in the windows looking in. I've got maybe a piece of wood that I might have found on the ground.
Oops.
Yeah. So it's just cool that it spoke to me as we were driving by and said, hey, we're here. You need to check this out.
That's extraordinary. I had a similar experience when my husband and I were in the UP. My next book features a lighthouse prominently in it that's in Nantucket, but we stopped at Whitefish Point and toured the lighthouse there, and I must have talked to the docent for 2 hours. And my husband's like, are we done?
Yes.
Can we leave?
Yes.
No, I have more questions.
Exactly.
You're married to an author. Deal.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I love the connections that you are making between the characters, and you're not divulging all of them. And I understand this is part of what you have to do when you write a series.
Right.
But I love how you're doing it because you're creating holes that are delicate fabric. They're not just empty holes. You're connecting families, and you're connecting children, and you're connecting community in such a way that there aren't any holes. Do you experience that in all of your writing, that you create fabric, or is going back and hole filling something you have to do consciously?
No, it's usually... There's times that I'm like, okay, wait a minute, I have to fix this. I'll do a sticky note, but for the most part, again, it's seamlessly going into there. And it's scary sometimes because I'm writing like, I didn't know that, or it explained this. I'll be writing something and I have no idea why I wrote this, and then it all come together in this next chapter. And I'm just like, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
It surprises me. It honestly surprises me.
It's that author out-of-body experience.
Yeah.
I wrote that? Really?
I
How
know,
did that
right?
happen?
I go back. I was looking through my book before I came, and I told my husband, someone would have to sit down and read this. This is pretty good.
Yeah. Wow, look at that. I didn't know I wrote that. The other thing I want to tell readers about this is a quick read. A lot of people may get the impression that this is heavy stuff because there is so much history surrounding it. This is a quick read. This is one of those books you don't want to put down because it has constant tension and constant action, and it never seems to let up.
Yes.
Were you compelled as you were writing this? Were you like, was it a daily, oh my gosh, I have to get this out? Almost like... I often talk with author friends about vomiting on the page. Was that kind of the sensation of what it felt like for you?
Yes, and there was times, where I would have to walk away from it for a day or two just because it was so intense. It had to be on there. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, it was just, I was drained. Drained.
Sheer exhaustion.
Just drained.
Yeah, I can't do any more of this today. I have to go take a walk.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. The connection of modern... present day. I don't want to say modern because modern is a misnomer, but present day with the history. You make this connection through journal writing, which I think is a marvelous idea. Have you thought about, and I haven't gotten to the other books yet, so I guess I'm asking for a teaser, but in the next book, book 2, this is Mouse's story. And book 3, is this Anastasia's story?
That's Anastasia's story, yes.
Okay. So these stories come to light through journals
Correct.
that the characters write.
Correct.
But it's told in third person, which I think is also a nifty trick you do. How can we... Let me see if I can put this in the right way. I was thinking about this this morning when I was looking at your book to review it. How can you, or do you, I guess is the question, is do you introduce the mother and daughter who introduce us to Mouse and Anastasia and the others? Do we get to know more about them? Is I guess what I'm asking.
You do.
Because
Cindy
they
and her
don't
mother,
have,
yes.
Cindy and her mother don't have a journal yet, right? They've discovered the other journals.
Correct.
Through a wonderful maze of wonderful discovery that you've created. I just love it. But so do you allow us to get to know them better?
Yes.
And I guess the question is, do we get to anticipate their journals? Or is that asking for you to give away too much? See, I'm terrible.
I'm trying to... all right, book 4 I'm working on right now. That's Frankie's story.
Okay.
So we find out... Okay, this is spoiler alert. Sorry, people. We will find out that her mother, Linda, has kept journals. But Cindy had no clue. I had no clue until she told me.
Okay.
So,
Frankie told you.
Yes, Frankie's story.
A weasel, he is. He's
Frankie's
an
quiet.
adorable weasel, but
Frankie's
he's a
very
weasel.
quiet. Frankie's been through a lot.
Yeah, he has.
He's very quiet, and sometimes I'm like, okay, Frankie, we have to talk. You have to talk. Come on, we have to write this book.
So, I loved the dichotomy in this book where you described the first time you played with dogs in the field. That, for me, was such a tender moment because it really reminded us of the history and of the time that they were living in. And children his age, he's preteen.
Right.
And he'd never run with a dog.
Right.
That, for me, was huge. Are you finding those little Easter eggs throughout your writing as you go?
Yes. And it's really strange because it tells me different things. And so when you read this, you will think one way. Then when you read Tobias's story, you're going to be like, oh, okay. And then when you read Anastasia's, because Anastasia, you go in with a preconceived notion. And then when you read her, you're like, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's each written from their point of view, so you're going to learn things that you did not.
Right, because they're going to divulge secrets about themselves. So in book 1, I had one very particular understanding of Anastasia, which was not necessarily kind.
Me either. When I was writing it, I didn't either.
Yeah. Toward the end of the book, I discover something about her that makes me stop and think, well, wait a minute. And then I learn about her connection with Mouse, Tobias. And then I thought, well, okay, maybe she is the not nice person I thought she was. And then, through Frankie, at almost the end of the book, I discover there's a whole nother piece. This collection of stories is so well layered. It truly feels like you are engaged in a seance with these characters, and they're just simply telling you their stories.
That's
the feel of the read.
I think that is the perfect way to describe it because, again, I have no clue until I write it, and then it's just like...
It's a little creepy, but it's kind of cool.
It is. It happened the very first novel I ever wrote. I never grew up thinking I'm going to be an author. Mm-hmm. I was never told this is a possibility. I mean, it was not it. I started off writing my friend was going through some things, and I said, I'm going to write you a happy ending. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to, and mm-hmm. I thought it was going to be a short story. We're going to laugh. I'm going to hand it to her. It's going to be great. That ended up being my very first novel. So I always say I didn't choose writing. Writing chose me.
I feel the same way. you go out in lectures
Yes.
and you talk about the history and about the books, and you get people infused with the understanding of what these kids went through. What's been the reception? How are these groups that you talk about this story with? How do they receive you, and how do they receive the story? This piece of history, a piece of Americana that most people don't know about.
They're very intrigued by it because some of them have never heard of it, and other people go in with a preconceived notion that, you know, all the kids were mistreated and all the kids were just used as nothing but labor and all of this. So it's my job to educate them and to let them know that was not always the truth.
Right.
You know, that yes, there was bad homes, but there were very good homes too. So it just, you know, you've got to think that a lot of these children were coming from New York, and a lot of them were living on the street, so they had no rules, they had no anything. You know, they could do whatever they wanted to do too.
Right.
You know, so they didn't have to answer to anybody at that point. So then they get there, and they might be on a farm where the farmer wants them to go to bed at a certain time and get up at a certain time and do the work. But the farmer was normally right there with them doing the work.
Right.
So, you know, if you get a child that has never worked or never done anything, then automatically they're doing it. So maybe they don't think they had a good life.
Well, I think it's fabulous that you're allowing people to experience that history in a way that is so captivating, and it's memorable. I mean, I'm going to be handing copies of your book out to everybody I know. Here, this is for you. Read this.
I appreciate that.
It's so exciting to me to find a new author that grabs me and doesn't want to let go. I mean, this is why I love talking about indie authors, is because not enough people know about you guys.
Right. And that's the challenge. Usually when they pick up the book, they don't put it down until they're done. So I have not yet that anybody's told me find anybody who didn't like the book. So it's just, for me, that's the challenge, is getting people to know that I exist.
Yeah. I just, like I say, I'm so infused with the layers of fabric that you weave. It's like the quilts. I equate it to the quilts. There's a little piece that keeps making the quilt bigger and fluffier, and I just love that. So thank you so much for sharing this with me. I'm so overjoyed. Thank you for coming and seeing us today. Thanks for spending your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And
thank you for inviting me.
This is great. I'm going to have you back when I get the next book done.
Okay.
So we can talk about that.
Every 6 months.
Perfect.
Yeah, every 6 months.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I hope you have a safe travel home. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.